Hello, I'm Donna Seaman, author of Identity Unknown, Rediscovering 7 American Women Artists, and I'm thrilled to be here on Author's Voice.
Welcome to Author's Voice, connecting authors to the world. This is Berta's books. My name is Roberta Rubin. I was a former bookseller in Winnetka, Illinois for over 30 years, and I just can't let go of my connection with books. So I'm very happy to be here today to talk about someone else's book and to introduce you to Donna Seaman, and her new book is Identity Unknown, Rediscovering 7 American Women Artists. I always want to say authors, but they were in part authors as well, but artists right now. Donna Seaman is here. She is the author of this exciting new book, published by Bloomsbury. And if you're watching this live, please use the button below the player to submit a question if you'd like to ask a question during our interview, and include your name and where you're from. And then more importantly, as a bookseller particularly, we would like you to order a signed book after listening to our interview. And you click the button below, and the author will sign it right here in our studio for you. So let us proceed. And I first want to say welcome, fellow Chicagoan.
Oh, thank you so much.
And she has many titles, and I will tell you about Donna Seaman. But I just had to say welcome, and also to tell you, the audience, about how we have both been involved in the world of books for many years. And our paths have crossed recently in the opening of the American Writers Museum. It's here in Chicago. It opened last May 15th. Donna was one of the lead content curators of the museum and a part of its National Advisory Council. I want to thank you for all you did to make our museum a reality.
Thank you so much, Roberta. It is an amazing to see
and
it.
So for those who come to Chicago to visit or who live in Chicago, we hope you can stop by 180 North Michigan Avenue. Donna is the editor of adult books for Booklist. Booklist is a part of the American Library Association. She is also the recipient of the James Friend Memorial Award for Literary Criticism and the recipient of Studs Terkel Humanities Service Award. Donna has reviewed books for the Chicago Tribune and the LA Times, among others. She has written essays for the Oxford Encyclopedia of American Literature. She interviews authors on Writers on the Air, and she has a very engaging series of book recommendations online, booklistonline.com. I recently read her review of Bill McKibben's Radio Free Vermont. Funny, and a wonderful review. But we're here to talk about your book, Donna's new book, Identity Unknown, Rediscovering 7 American Women Artists. The reviews have been stellar. Oprah's magazine said, Seaman recreates the careers of 7 groundbreaking female virtuosos, rescuing from history's margins bold, invigorating work that defied the male-centric norm. And the Washington Post said, Seaman is an enchanting biographer. I agree. And I read the 7 chapters on these dynamic women of the 20th century over a weekend. I couldn't put it down. So in your introduction, Donna, you describe a group of artists, all men, in an ensemble. Artists of the 30s and 40s, Mark Rothko, Jackson Pollock, etc., and one woman. And the reader looks to see who the woman is and finds the tag, identity unknown. So this is a good place to start. Tell us how you found that and how you decided to title your book with that title.
Well, thank you so much, Roberta, for all your good words. It's thrilling to hear. That story goes back to when I was in art school. I do have a fine arts background, and as in your introduction you explained that people think of me as a book person, which I am, but I also had this sort of secret life as an artist. But I was maybe one of not the majority of art students who was forever in the library, always reading, reading, reading. And I loved reading art history. And I would see photographs, as you just described. And I would see a woman in the photograph, and I knew who everyone else was. I'm like, who is that? And in the caption, it would say. And that just was burned in my consciousness all these years. I could never get over that. I'm like, how could that be? No one knew who this woman was? Obviously not true.
No.
So that stayed with me, and when I started working on these essays, that phrase just popped in my head, and I thought, it's a good phrase, a good title, and I like that it has sort of a mystery shimmer to it, too. So,
it does,
yeah.
It does. It drew me into the book. Who are these women, and did I know them? Well, were all the women artists, did any of them know each other? I was trying to find some reference to that.
I don't think any had met, but they knew of each other. I know in Chicago that Christina Ramberg, who's a painter and the only artist in the book that I actually did know, certainly was aware of Gertrude Abercrombie. Their paths may have crossed in Hyde Park, where Gertrude lived. Gertrude died in 1977, so it's possible that they met, but I was never able to establish that.
True.
And the others, they were pretty disparate, lived in different parts of the country. But they were aware of each other.
The oldest, or the earliest, of course, was Louise Nevelson.
Right.
And I love the title. We'll talk about the titles of each chapter.
Oh, yeah.
But Louise Nevelson was born in the century before, 1899.
Yeah, so in Ukraine.
And that's right, in the Ukraine.
Same background I do, Russian Jewish.
Right.
Came over as a girl. But unlike most of us, instead of going to New York, they ended up in Maine. So she lived in Rockport, Maine.
Right, and then ended up here.
Ended up in New York, yeah.
In New York,
yeah.
And here a little bit. There's some of the artists, before we talk about the individuals, were there some that you liked more than others? Because as I was reading, there were some that I was drawn to more than others.
Yes, I mean, I found them all really fascinating, but, I suppose each of us, something resonates in you more. I mean, I could identify more with some than others for one reason or another. But I became deeply attached to each of them. I mean, it was hard to tear myself away from one when I finished that piece and to go work on the next. I would sort of miss her and think about her.
That's right.
So I was particularly obsessed with Gertrude Abercrombie, I suppose. She's kind of haunted me.
I kind of knew that, too, as I was reading.
Interesting.
I thought that Abercrombie was the one who you could identify with.
Yes.
I loved her self-portraits. There were several. Tell us about them. It was Brown and Abercrombie, right? Who were the two who loved to paint themselves, or draw themselves. And
it was fascinating to me to think about how each of them created a visual diary. I mean, they may have kept journals too, but and Gertrude did. She was always scribbling and writing. It was very disorganized, though. It wasn't really a journal.
There's a
but,
picture.
There
is one.
The
one that you titled.
Exactly. That's Girl Searching.
Girl Searching.
That is a tiny canvas. It lives in Philadelphia. And
okay.
I just was so struck by it. Now, there's her prairie landscape. That's a classic Abercrombie. That's her as a young woman. She calls herself a girl. She painted this, though, when she was in her 30s, a wife and mother, but still felt like a wandering girl, a lost, searching person.
Yes.
She just was not comfortable in her own skin. She had a tough upbringing. So that's, and she has these emblems she paints over and over again, the bare tree, kind of gesturing to the sky, the moon. She's a real moon girl. And there's another one. There she is on the Illinois, and she's from Illinois, spent part of her childhood in Aledo towards the Mississippi River, but came to Hyde Park neighborhood in Chicago as a girl and went to school there. And there she is again. She had lots of these roads, those stark little buildings, and a lot of tree stumps. And this one's amusing. There's some form of rescue in the distance with a parachute, a man dropping to the ground with a parachute. And she was always hoping for some help.
For some help.
Some help.
She
yeah.
was one of the more needy. There were several that
yes.
were not needy.
Right, right.
And maybe we should list who they were before
Sure.
we start in on all the questions.
Name the 7.
Name them, and with these wonderful titles that you picked.
Oh, thank you. I love that you noticed that.
Yes.
That's a real book lover.
The Empress of the In-Between, the story of Louise Nevelson. Girl Searching, and a story about Gertrude Abercrombie. Lois Mailou, is that the way? Mailou Jones, Behind the Masks. And she was the only black woman artist in the group. But lived into her 90s and seemed to be energetic.
Lived
and
well.
And
brilliant, creative
brilliant
woman.
and did very
Adventurous,
well.
yeah.
The Rebellious Bravo, Reese Morton. I was wondering while I was reading that, how'd you ever find her?
Oh, yes, Ree Morton.
Reese Morton.
Too little known.
And Joan Brown, Swimming in Light. She was the other one who loved to do self-portraits.
Right.
And I love that she was also connected with Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera.
Right. A San Francisco artist.
San Francisco
area.
artist.
They crossed paths.
And then Freeze and Melt, Christina Bamberg, who was the young woman you knew. And then the last one, Lenore Tawney. Is that the way you pronounce it?
Yes, Lenore Tawney.
All of a piece, and she did.
She was a fiber artist.
Fiber
really
and
the first.
That's right.
Fine
and
art.
the loom work.
Yeah,
she was a weaver.
Loom work. She was a weaver.
So, well, we've at least said who.
Nice to call them out.
Who is who?
Right.
That's right. And in fact, we had a question from the audience already on Lenore Tawney,
yes.
and I might ask it now.
Very well.
My family personally knew Lenore Tawney and has a number of her works. She was prolific and had many different periods, becoming best known for her weavings. And she lived to 90.
She almost 100.
Almost 100.
Almost 100
She
years
lived to
old.
almost 100. She was born in 1907. So anyway, let's get the question back. What other mediums is she known for beyond weaving?
Lenore lived her whole life. Every aspect of her life was artistic. And she, in addition to weaving, she made many collages. She made many drawings, really fine, exacting drawings on graph paper, because that's kind of like the grid interested her as a weaver. She also used postcards as works of art and collaged and painted and drew on those and mailed them to friends who collected them. And in fact, the art critic Helen Cotter made a whole book out of her postcards because they were such gems. She also made sculptures. She used found objects, she used feathers and beads, and she also made sculptures out of books. And those of us that love books cringe a little because she would rip pages out to use in her collages. She would weave things with strips of pages from books, particularly books in languages other than English. She was very attracted to Italian and books in Chinese and other Asian languages. And she also, and I had the great privilege of seeing some of these objects, she would dig into the books, cut openings through the pages. Like, you know, that people used to hide things in books, like flasks during the Prohibition or your jewelry or something. Well, she made these sort of labyrinths, these sort of mazes in these books. I don't know that anyone ever saw them. It was like for her own, you know, expression. But I got to sit and page through those, and they were sort of like tunnels through a book, and they were very beautiful. And she filled drawers in her studio with objects, and she sort of nested them in torn paper and fabric. And her household objects, she would collage them so they would look prettier, like her cold cream. She would like cover it with like pretty paper or something. She was just fantastic. Did Pilates and yoga into her 90s. She was a very meditative, very spiritual artist.
And she was the one who loved Lake Michigan.
Yes,
which,
when
coming
she lived
from Chicago, the two of us both know how we cherish our time at Lake Michigan.
Exactly. Yeah, she lived right near Oak Street Beach when she lived here. And yeah, she had quite a life. She really did.
Now, did any of the other artists know her? You said you didn't meet her.
I never met her. I don't think, I mean, they knew of each other. She and Louise Nevelson probably met, I'm imagining, because they were both real party women. So I think in New York they probably did meet. But the others, I'm not sure. I never really ran against, came up against evidence of that. And Lois spent most of her time in Washington, D.C. and Paris and Africa. She traveled all over Africa, yes. She was quite the art ambassador. She was a professor at Howard University in D.C. for many years.
And she was the one who married...
she married an artist from Haiti.
Artist, right. And then followed someone over to Africa, Neri?
Was that? Pierre Noel.
Yes, okay.
And he was also an artist, but he was Haitian. Yeah, Pierre.
Right.
Seems like an amazing person. So they lived in Haiti sometimes too. In fact, one of their neighbors was another artist, a dancer. I greatly admire Catherine Dunham, who was one of the first African American dance troupers, and also a brilliant scholar at the University of Chicago. Amazing people. I mean, one of the great things about studying lives is all the other people you come across
that you come
in your research.
And that is one of my questions to you. How did you winnow it down from, I'm sure you had a large pool to pick from.
Oh, for the artists
artists that you put in the book.
Absolutely.
How did you narrow it down to the 7?
To the 7.
Was there a thread
question.
Or something?
There were. I had to come up with some criteria. I had very long lists. I decided certainly that they would all be deceased, that I wouldn't write about living artists.
Yes,
that's very different.
I have that down.
They're all gone. They're all dead. And I wanted 20th century artists because that's what I know the most about and appreciate the most. Also, I decided that I wanted to write about artists that worked with their hands, that painted or sculpted or wove. And not photographers and not filmmakers, even though I had a lot on my list. Because I found myself thinking about how much I miss working with materials. I spend my whole life at a computer or reading, and it's a real challenge to create work out of wood, metal, stone, paint. And also for women in those years, in the early and mid-20th century, women could not sign leases for studios. They could not get funding. Like later in the 60s, you could not get a credit card in your own name. So I became very interested in women artists that really had a struggle just to have a studio, and also who physically were, strong, like worked with materials. I mean, Joan Brown painted 20-foot long canvases. Louise Nevelson built enormous structures on her own and with fabricators. So I just became interested in that. You learn a lot when you work with your body, and all of us screen people are kind of losing that sphere of knowledge.
Contact.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's interesting.
So that was one of my criteria.
Your criteria. Louise Nevelson was the only one that I really was that familiar with when I first started to read. And is she having a rebirth now?
Yes. A lot of art people say, well, she was never forgotten. Well, she was. And I know this because I've been on the case for a long time. And when I first came to Booklist, for instance, I would get these these art history books, like Modern American Sculpture. There's a great photograph of Louise in her full regalia. And I would immediately turn to the index. Oh, she was, I'm spacing on the photographer's name. I was so fortunate to have this photograph in my book. I'm going to find this. Lynn Gilbert. Thank you, Lynn Gilbert. Gorgeous portrait. So I would look in the index of these books coming out, and in the 90s. And Louise Nevelson was not in these books, which to me was appalling. And that's the first piece I wrote. It's the first piece in the book, the first one I wrote, because she was a superstar. And when I was a girl growing up in New York State, I revered her, and I loved her work. She was a big influence on me, and she was everywhere. I mean, she was in Vogue.
Right,
she was in Interview. She hung out with Andy Warhol and all those people. And there's one of her totem pieces that's in the Farnsworth Museum in Maine. And then she disappeared, poof. And her very close friend, the playwright Edward Albee, wrote a play about that called Occupant.
Isn't that telling?
Yes.
Did you hear, audience? Occupant. Which is another anonymous name.
Precisely.
That was very interesting.
So that was a big catalyst to me. How could you be that famous and disappear? Whereas all the men of that era, everyone still knows them. And her work museums put her work away. I mean, I used to see her work at the Art Institute here. That's been in storage for decades now.
Well, maybe
Hello out
after
there.
reading your book, they might
bring her back.
reconsider. Was she part of any movement? I know some of
Yeah.
as you say, the men that still are alive, but there were some, for instance, Christine Bamberg is called part of the Chicago Imagist.
Right, yeah, Christina Bamberg was part of that group. Louise Nevelson was at the heart of the abstract expressionist time.
Right.
And into pop art too.
And the pop art.
She really bridged all that. I mean, her work was abstract, but she worked in boxes. She built wooden boxes, which was similar to Joseph Cornell. And also, just part of the abstract painting. I mean, Franz Klein worked in black and white, and so she was really part of all that, and she knew all those people and hung out and, argued about art.
Right. She looks
was
like
prominent.
she was fierce.
Oh, totally.
That she
You
had
know
a
she
fierceness
was.
about her that would help her along the way.
Yes.
We did just get another question
Oh,
here.
exciting.
If you could imagine Mary from New Orleans, if you could imagine these women from history giving one bit of advice to a young woman today, what do you think it might be?
Oh, that's an excellent question.
It's a good question.
Thank you. I think to a woman, they would say, stick to your passions. Follow what you care about the most. Don't be discouraged. Just work and work and work and do what you have to do what you need to do. And that's what really struck me about each of these stories, that no matter what was going on, and they all faced tremendous adversity and enormous indifference. Nobody really cared what women were doing, if they were making art or not. And they never stopped. I mean, even poor Gertrude kept painting and painting and painting. And Lois overcame sexism and racism. I mean, she could not submit her work to group shows, even at the national galleries in our nation's capital in the 40s. And so she got around that. She had a white friend bring it in. She submitted. She used her initials. She was the African-American artist. So
African-American.
The advice I think every one of these would give every one of us, which is just stick to it. Do it.
Well, I was aware that none of them had their husbands in place. Nobody lived with their first husband or stayed with their first husband.
No.
One first husband died young. That was too bad.
That was that was Lenore. But
That
actually,
was Lenore.
it's kind of an amazing love story because she never remarried.
She never.
She became a very, very spiritual, very much a loner in a way, although she had community. She was part of ashrams and she loved to entertain. She had many, many friends, but she really she did not want to, she really wanted to control of her life. She kept it. Joan Brown married over and over again. And
over and over. She was Brown.
Each
and
phase
then
of her paintings.
somebody else and someone else.
She was a very passionate person.
Right. And Joan Brown is the one who tragically died.
Died very
went
young.
Went out to India.
Yes, she was in India.
And was building an obelisk and was told that the building was not secure, and they went in anyway, and the building fell on them and killed her.
Yeah, she was only 52.
52.
Yeah. Oh.
That was sad after hearing so much about her vibrancy.
Exactly.
So,
she was tremendously prolific. A lot of her work's everywhere, but people don't know her.
And they don't know her, exactly. Is there any one of these artists that you want to work on again? And are you thinking to write another book in this direction? Or is I know writing is part of your life too.
Yes.
So.
Well, I think I've been very gratified that a lot of these artists their work's being shown. So I sort of feel like I'd like to maybe continue some of the stories. The Elmhurst Art Museum here in Illinois is mounting a Gertrude Abercrombie exhibition this winter. It opens in January. I'll be giving a talk.
Of course.
And so I have to admit, the times I think, well, maybe I should do a full biography about Gertrude. And I've met a lot of people while out and about with this book who knew her or connected to her in some way or who own her work, she would go to these outdoor art fairs, the Hyde Park art fairs, and sell her work for like $5. So I've had people come up to me and go, I have some Abercrombies, and I bought them when I was a teenager. So I feel like there's more to know about her. And that, a catalog of her work really needs to be done.
And the catalog for the exhibit. Well, that's exciting.
So I think about that. And I have other ideas about books, too. So.
And reading. And the fact that one of the artists supposedly painted what she read. Or it was like writing. I think it might have been Lenore.
It was Lenore, yeah.
And you talked about the fact that she would, if she hadn't painted it or woven it, she would have written it.
Yes, it really struck me that the way she worked with threads was, and she was a constant reader, always reading, had a huge collection of books. And she lost her sight late in life, and so she became very enamored of audiobooks. And she would listen to them over and over again. And she had people come in and read to her. And I can see if I couldn't read, I would need someone to be reading for me, yes. So her work did that kind of back and forth, and the way like a book builds word by word, she built things thread by thread. Seemed very close.
Oh, that's a beautiful analogy, Donna. I like that.
Thank you. Yes.
Right. Well, and audiobooks right now in the book world are really just burgeoning. They're coming out in great numbers. And
there's one of
is
my
there
book.
An audio?
Yes, I have listened to parts of it. Actually, I sort of forgot I had it on my, I guess it was on my laptop, and it came up, and I was like, that's my book. I, of course, recognize the sentence.
So you can get this also
it's
audio.
on Audible, yeah.
Although the visual
you don't want to miss the
with
place.
the centerpieces is something very integral to the book, and so I would not want to miss that.
No, I was thrilled to be able to have all those plates in this book.
And
that was a lot of work too.
I also have to make note of your notes. They go on for pages.
Berta, you are the
pages.
best.
Well, I'm
proud
a reader.
Of my endnotes. I'm proud of my endnotes.
Oh, you have to be so proud. They go on for pages, and I enjoyed going back and forth and saying, is this something I should be following?
Yes, painstaking work, obviously.
Yes, that is. How long did it take you to write this?
Well, I'd written the Louise Nevelson and the Ree Morton probably like 8 or 9 years ago. I reworked them, but I had done some of that research. The rest of it, I managed to do in 3 years, I think. It was hard work. Yeah,
I know.
But the research is heaven.
Research and research.
It's reading.
Right,
so,
right.
Yeah.
Well, I admire
great.
everyone who has written a book.
I feel the same.
And you have to feel the same.
I
but
do.
It's just a very loving task, and you did it so well.
Thank
again, I hope the audience out there can have a chance to read Identity Unknown by Donna Seaman. Okay, and we are reaching the end of this time. We have for this live broadcast. And we've been talking with Donna, as you know, about Identity Unknown. And thank you, Bloomsbury, for publishing this.
Yes.
I know the people that in the editorial section, and they're very, very nice. And thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And thank you at home, and good afternoon.